Are you thinking about becoming a PA? Wondering how to successfully apply? Listen in to learn how this successful PA applicant did it.
Welcome to Admission Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" Confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me for the 349th episode of Admission Straight Talk. This interview is all about getting accepted to PA school and how one PA applicant successfully did so. In addition to today's interview, we have resources for wannabe PAs on the Accepted site, and I'd like to invite you to download Accepted's free guide, 10 Tips for Acceptance to Physician Assistant Programs. Grab your free copy for advice on selecting the best PA program for you, writing your personal statement, interviewing effectively, and simply presenting the best application you possibly can. Download 10 tips for acceptance to physician assistant programs from accepted.com/PA10tips. That's accepted.com/PA, the number 10, and then the word tips. Our guest today, Erica Cousins, is happily anticipating the start of PA school. She earned her bachelor's from Boston University in 2012 and is currently working as a home healthcare case manager in California. Let's learn how she decided to become a PA and got accepted to 3 PA programs. Erica, welcome to Admission Straight Talk.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be chatting with you.
Same here. Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Vermont. I went to school, as you mentioned, in Boston. So of course I lived there for a few years, and then I've been out here in San Diego for about 7 years now. And throughout it all, I've worked in healthcare. I've been involved in healthcare in one capacity or another since before high school. I mean, since I was probably about 14 or so, whether it was, volunteering at the local hospital or what have you. So I knew for a long time that I wanted to go into healthcare. So yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Was there like a personal health crisis or incident, or you just gravitated towards that?
When my siblings and I were younger, my brother did he was hit by a car when we were younger. And he was my older brother, so I was even younger. So that sort of introduced me to a side of healthcare that I definitely wouldn't have seen otherwise, being by his side when he was getting taken care of and sort of recognizing what makes one healthcare provider better or more effective than another. That was valuable at the time. And so that sort of was my introduction to healthcare. But I also just had a very genuine interest. My mom would always say that, I was never ever nervous or, shaken by the things that were going on. I was always interested and watching intently. So yeah, I knew from an early age that there was some sort of interest there.
Okay. And why PA and not nurse practitioner, MD, or DO?
So I thought for a long time that I wanted to go to medical school. I was pre-med at BU, and it wasn't until probably like my junior year, around then, that I just learned more about the PA role and what it is, and their how they play a part in the healthcare team. And I sort of became more interested in it and felt like it appealed to me even more. I like the idea of being on the PA side of the PA physician relationship, where, I have somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody to collaborate with. Not because I'm not confident in my own decisions or anything like that, but because I like that collaboration and that camaraderie. And a lot of times there's opportunities for a mentee-mentor relationship there as well. And I've always enjoyed having a mentor at work. And yeah, there, like I said, it was once I learned more about the PA role, it was sort of like a light bulb went off in my head that I felt like that would be an even better fit for me than being a physician.
And what about PA versus, let's say, nurse practitioner, NP?
So that was another thing that I looked into. By the time I was through with school, I thought, okay, so if I want to be a nurse practitioner, that would mean that I would have to get, a second bachelor's in nursing and then do the 2 years for the NP. And even though I was willing to do that, once I kind of learned even more about, the nursing model versus the medical model, where in the medical model, which is for people who don't know, PA students and medical students both learn under the medical model, whereas nursing students learn under the nursing model and the medical
And
model.
what are some of the differences between those two models?
The medical model deals more with the underlying medical afflictions, getting down to what is going on with someone, and starting the treatment from there, which the nursing model pertains more to behavioral medicine. And so once I sort of learned the differences, I felt like the medical model appealed more to me. And like I said, if I chose to do the NP path, it would have been more schooling, since I would have had to, go back and get a second bachelor's and then do 2 years to become an NP. So that was a big factor for me as well.
What was your undergraduate major?
Human physiology.
All right.
Yeah, and with a concentration in pre-medicine, like I said.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And was your 2019-20 application to PA school your first application to PA school, or was it a reapplication?
So this was my reapplication. So I applied the first go around, and I believe I applied to about 11 schools, something like that. And I did not get into any schools. I didn't even get invited to an interview at any schools. And that was such a humbling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That
And
hurts.
it does. And especially because, my application was strong. Even then, I went to a great school, Boston University, for undergrad, and I had at that time still had thousands of direct patient care hours. I'd been working in healthcare a long time and in many different areas of healthcare, and had shadowing experience and volunteer experience. And so it wasn't like I, submitted a half-hearted application.
Right.
And so that was, like I said, very humbling. And so
And disappointing.
right. And so the first thing I did is get feedback from all the schools as to why they felt that I wasn't a great fit, and they pretty unanimously had said that they wish that my science GPA had been higher. And there were some of them where they said, on a secondary note, I graduated from undergrad a few years ago, and so they had wished that some of my prereqs were a little not quite as old. So that was a factor as well. And so I basically took a bunch of courses in between the first application cycle and this most recent one. So, I took some online courses, some on campus, whatever I was able to, coordinate with my work schedule. So I ended up taking them at multiple different schools. I had to get creative, and I raised my science GPA and therefore my overall GPA. And I continued shadowing PAs, and I continued to embark upon, volunteer projects in my community. And I basically just worked really, really hard to improve my application even more. And then I also was more strategic, I think, the second go around with which schools I applied, because one thing that I ran into the first cycle was, once I submitted the main CASPA application, and then schools got back to me and they said, okay, can you do the secondary application with additional essays and so forth? I ended up spending a lot of time on essays for schools that I either knew I wouldn't get into, or schools that I didn't even necessarily want to go to that badly. And then all of that time was kind of taken away from the secondary applications and essays of schools that I probably had a better chance of getting into, or that I wanted to go to more. And so I was much more strategic about which schools I applied to. And then I got invited to several interviews this go around. And so that was very encouraging. I ended up being invited to 6 interviews.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So
And you
that
had
was,
how many acceptances?
so I actually have been accepted to, let me think now, it's 3, and then I've been waitlisted at 1.
Out of 6 interviews. And how many applications did you submit?
This time I submitted 12.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
By the way, as an aside, I want to get back to your story, but I spoke recently to a mom whose son is applying to medical school, not PA school. And she told me that he wants to apply to 60 medical schools. And that's exactly what I did. I said, I really don't think that's a good idea.
No.
No, no, no.
No, you've got to be more strategic than
A
that.
little bit more, yeah, a lot more strategic than that.
Yeah.
I mean, medical school is normal. I mean, we say 20, very frequently, but 60, no. I was like,
Yeah.
no, he doesn't want to do
Yeah,
that.
because you can't possibly put your best foot forward with 60
Yeah.
applications. That's just
Not by the time you
possible.
get to it's on the primary, you just, check the box and write the check. But
Mhm.
when you get to secondaries, you can't do that. You really
Mhm.
can't.
Exactly. That's where you really start to be like, wow, this is
Right.
a lot.
So the second time around, you retook some science courses, so all that
Mhm.
work was recent. I assume you got better grades in them.
Oh, yes.
You continued volunteering, and I have a question about your volunteer work. But in terms of did you find? Well, let me ask this question first. Did you find any volunteer work particularly helpful in terms of confirming your decision to become a PA? Or do you feel it was, or did any volunteer work, or not even volunteer work, paid work, come up again and again, let's say in your interviews?
Some of the volunteer work. So for a couple of years, I've been volunteering for the San Diego Food Bank.
Yeah.
And then through that, as part of the BU Alumni Association, BU every April does this. The whole month of April they call the Global Days of Service, where BU alumni all over the world do volunteer work, and then we've got our BU t-shirts on and so forth. And so through the San Diego Food Bank, I organized a group volunteer event with some BU alumni in the San Diego area. And so that was, I felt like that was beneficial, because it sort of proved my involvement with my alumni association and bettering the community. And then I also organized some beach cleanup events, and that was one of the ones that I was even more proud of, because in a single day, we cleaned up so much. And that was, it's easier to sort of tangibly feel the difference that you're making when you have these like dumpsters full of trash, and
Garbage.
and the people that you're with have done all of that. It's easier to sort of see the difference that you've made. And so I feel like when you're doing volunteer work, if you're applying to a school in the healthcare field, it doesn't have to be specifically healthcare related. You know, they want to see that you are working to better your community in one way or another. And
Right.
a lot of times, I think if it's not directly involved with healthcare, it even shows that you have a life outside of healthcare, because it's pretty typical for people to not have lives outside of healthcare because it's a field that's very demanding of us.
That's right.
Um, so yeah, that was, and then I also did some volunteer work with um, an organization called Tree San Diego, where I would go on Saturdays and help plant trees around San Diego to help sort of foster urban forestation.
Okay,
Hmm.
great.
Yeah, just a couple little things like that.
Yeah, I think in general, and certainly in MD&D programs, and I think in most healthcare, the career itself is so dedicated to service. The
Hmm.
schools want to see a dedication to service.
Right.
So if you're just kind of checking off the volunteer boxes for clinical medicine, then
Hmm.
you're not really showing, you're showing interest in clinical medicine, but you may not be showing that commitment to community and to service. So I think
Absolutely.
that your point is very, very well taken.
Hmm.
Now,
Thank
getting back to the question about what you did differently the second time around,
you.
did you do anything differently in terms of, let's say responding to the questions or actually in the application? Obviously, taking those courses was critical, but what about in the application itself?
In the application itself, I'd say I definitely, so I rewrote my personal statement. If you're
Mm.
somebody who's reapplying, don't submit the same personal statement. And there were the first application cycle, I wrote a great personal statement, so I took the same core ideas from that, but I just revamped the whole thing and told my story in a little bit of a different way. And I think it was even better than the first go around. And I did the same thing for some of the schools that I applied to a second time. To my surprise, they had the same essay questions as they had the cycle before. And so, of course, I had submitted those essays during the first application cycle, and I changed those as well. You don't want to submit the same essay the second.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely not.
No.
And so I did a lot of revisions, I would say, for sure.
When did you submit your CASPA application?
I submitted the CASPA the first time that I applied. I submitted it July 1st, and then the second time I submitted it, I believe it was definitely mid-June. I want to say it was
It was
like
early.
June
It
16th
was a
or
little
something. It
earlier.
was earlier, yes.
Okay. Um, what was the hardest part of the application process for you?
For me, it's the essays, definitely. Like a lot of other um, medical and PA and nurse practitioner applicants. I'm a math and science person. I don't like writing essays. Even when I was in school, I like school, of course. That's why I'm trying to go back. But writing essays has always been such a struggle for me. And I think that I'm a pretty good writer. The end result is always pretty good, but the process of getting there has never been easy for me.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, I was in elementary school, and I had a teacher who was really into art projects. I never
Hmm.
got past stick figures. I hated art projects. I would come
Hmm.
home and say, "Can't you just give me a worksheet, something simple?" You know? But
Yeah.
so a little bit different approach.
Hmm.
So it was the essays. And did you? I mean, obviously you had the essays from last time, but you very wisely chose to redo them. Do not submit the same essays that didn't work the first time around. That's not, an
Yeah.
expected result. So that was really smart. Did you like? I don't know. Was there other than determining you were not going to do the same thing? What I mean, was a difference in that your approach to it, and how did you stay on top of the secondaries? So there's two questions, not necessarily the same.
So I stayed on top of them by basically a lot of time management. It all comes down to that, and you have to slowly chip away at things, especially because there's so much. I mean, even aside from the essays, there's this whole section that's, your quote experiences, and it's about all of the different experiences that you've had, the different jobs, and even non-healthcare related and volunteer work. And so that, and you write about a paragraph for each experience. So there's so much writing for the entire application, and you have to slowly chip away at it. And I found for me what was the most useful is to sort of work on one section and then set it down, go back to it a couple days later and revise it, and look at it with a new set of eyes. Sure. And just I slowly worked at it every single day. When I would come home from work at night, I would sit at the computer and like I said, just do little bits every day. So I would say that's how I stayed on top of it. And the secondaries, that part, I would work on one school at a time when I did
Smart.
that. Yeah. Because I found that it was more helpful it was easier for me to keep, the mission statement of that school and all of the information about that school sort of in my brain, and to really engross myself in that school, fit for that school and why it would be a great fit for me. So with the secondaries, I definitely tried to do it one program at a time.
Very smart.
Very smart.
Definitely the way to go.
Definitely the way to go. Thank you.
How did you prepare for your interviews?
So that was, I did a lot of research. I mean, the first thing that I suggest people doing is research the schools. I researched everything about the school, everything about the program itself, and then I also found as much information as I could about the faculty and administration. And most schools, they won't tell you, who's going to be there on interview day. So I basically just learned as much as I could about all the different people, so that during the interview I could, ask them questions like, oh, I know you went to this PA school. Are you glad that you went to that PA school, or do you wish that you went to this PA school of the program to which I'm being interviewed? And then I also did a lot of research online about typical PA school interview questions and medical school, because a lot of time, they can be one and the same. I did research on MMI interviews, and the accepted website was certainly helpful for that as well.
Thank you.
Like I said, I did a lot of research ahead of time, and I also just sort of jotted down notes to myself about why I would be a great fit for that school, and things that I wanted to highlight, and things like that. So I did quite a bit of prep for each interview.
It sounds to me like you were just checking all the boxes.
Yeah, I tried to.
Now, I know that lately you've been working with an elderly woman, I believe. Are you planning to stay in gerontology when you become a PA? Or are you open, or where do you see your career going?
So I actually recently got a new job working at Sharp Memorial Hospital here in San Diego in the stroke and neurology unit. I'm working as a nursing assistant and healthcare associate. So as you were saying, I was for a few years, I was working for a family, one of most primarily, I was caring for a woman with advanced dementia, and there was also a quadriplegic male, and then a man with diabetes. And so I that was amazing experience. I learned so much, and I'm so happy that I did it. But to answer your question, I don't think I'll stay in gerontology. I think I might actually take a left turn and go into pediatrics.
Really? Oh, that's school different.
I think so. Yeah. And of course, you never know until you get into your clinical rotations and I really get my feet wet and figure out what I want to do. But I've been thinking that for a little while, and I like working with all patient populations. That's another reason why I love the PA role as opposed to being a physician or an NP, is that we don't specialize during our education. It's a generalist education and we don't have to choose a patient population. And in the past, I've worked in mental health. I've worked a little bit in pediatrics. I've worked with the elderly community, and now I'm working, like I said, in stroke and neurology, which unfortunately doesn't just affect the older generation. It can affect um, people
Any
at
age group.
any age. And yeah, like I said, I do like working with a lot of different groups of people. And that's one of the pros, to me, it's a pro of being a PA, is that, if I wanted to work in pediatrics for a few years, I can do that. And then I can say, I think maybe I want to work in dermatology, and I can go and do that. And it's definitely a big draw for me.
That's great. What are your plans for between now and the start of PA school?
Well, I'm going to continue working at the hospital, which this is the first time I've ever worked at a hospital, and I absolutely love it. I've done
That's
tons of,
great.
internships and shadowing and things like that at hospitals, but I really, really love it. And so I'm going to continue working there, and then I'm gonna try and travel as much as I can, because that's what on interview days, when you have the opportunity to ask current students or recent graduates, do you have any advice for people before they go to school? Everybody pretty much unanimously is like, travel, just relax and have as much fun as you can, because you've got to enjoy your freedom while you have it.
There's some truth to that for sure. Um,
Yeah.
any last bits of wisdom or advice for PA wannabes?
Um, Definitely. If in terms of the application process, I would say everything always takes longer than you think it's going to. Even once you're in the midst of the application process and you realize how long it takes, you still think to yourself, oh, well, X, Y, or Z will only take me this long, and it always takes longer. So if you have the luxury of starting as soon as you can, I definitely recommend that. And then in terms of just the PA track in general, it's extremely competitive, which I'm sure applicants already know. But if you're somebody like me who didn't get in and didn't even get invited to any interviews the first go around, it definitely will be discouraging, but you've got to stick with it if this is what you really want to do. And I'm so happy that I stuck with it, because I am even more confident going into school now as I would have been if I had gotten in the first go around. If I had gotten in, I know that I would have done well in whatever program, but now that I had to take all of those extra courses, and I had to do that while I was working full time, and just completely like envelop myself in my schoolwork and regular work, it made me even more prepared for school. And I'm so happy that I did that. And I'm going into my PA career even more confident that I'm going to perform academically. And so, in the end of the day, I'm happy that things didn't work out the way that I wanted them to during the first application cycle.
But they worked out in a good way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What do you wish I would have asked you? Anything I should have asked you and haven't?
Um, something I wish you would have asked me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there isn't anything I wish you would have asked me, but one thing that that I'm realizing right now, I should have told you about when you asked me about my volunteer work is I should have told you about the medical missions that I went on in Ecuador and um, Honduras, and I also worked when I was in college, I took a semester off at BU and I worked at a lab in New Zealand.
Wow.
And so those were some sort of like unique aspects of my story and of my application that I think set me apart. And so I would recommend to people, if you're able to, if you have the means and you're able to do any sort of medical mission like that, I highly, highly recommend it, because even if at the end of the day I had decided that I didn't want to go into the medical field, which many of the people in college that I did these medical missions with, they didn't end up going to medical school or what have you. But it was such an incredible experience
Yeah,
for
of
so
course.
many reasons. So I highly recommend that if you're able to swing it.
That's great. Thank you very much for adding that. And Erica, I want to thank you for joining me for this podcast. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you for sharing your experience and your perspective. We're going
Thank you
to
so much. I appreciate you reaching out to me.
You're very welcome. We're going to link from the show notes at accepted.com/349 to resources that are related to becoming a PA. As specifically, we're going to link to the free guide, 10 Tips for Acceptance Physician Assistant Programs. You can download your copy at accepted.com/PA10tips. That's accepted.com/PA10 and the word tips. Listener, thank you too for tuning into this, our 349th episode. If you found this show worthwhile, please make sure you don't miss any others. Subscribe through your favorite podcatcher. We have subscribe links in the show notes at accepted.com/349. This is Admission Straight Talk produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.